my god, I'll die on this hill. Everyone's like, okay, I can't promise I wouldn't be a little sullen. It is actually a hate crime. You can't tell if you're being perceived. Immediately a flaw. Today we're going to be moving through the entire plot of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. We'll be discussing character development, foreshadowing, metaphor, and we'll be working to understand the more problematic elements of the text, intentionally or not. What is the point of this book? All the other books in the series work to drive the plot forward, littered with foreshadowing and small characters necessary to advance the Dark Lord and the Chosen One toward their last prophetic fight. But Chamber of Secrets seems to be something a little bit different. It seems to be kind of a complete work in itself. Is the point of this book to perhaps acknowledge that the people that ruined the lives of the generation before are the same people that are ruining these people's lives? Let's find out. We open with Harry at the Dursleys, and Hedwig, the owl, has been in her cage all summer long. She is sustaining herself only on the scraps of food that Harry can bring himself not to eat, because the Dursleys are starving Hedwig, but they are also often starving Harry. He typically goes without nourishment as a form of punishment for existing. Harry's brooms and schoolbooks have been locked away in the cupboard under the stairs. The sheer cruelty of locking his most prized possessions in his previous prison is like, it's Harry's 12th birthday today, and no one has acknowledged it. And it's more than normal for the shitty Dursleys to pull some shit like this, especially because they have more on their minds than usual today. But Harry is most saddened because he hasn't heard from his best friends, Ron and Hermione, who promised to write over the summer, and he hasn't heard from them even once. And because Hedwig is locked up, he can't send letters out to them to initiate the conversation. He has to wait for their owls to reach him. So he's stuck and waiting and wondering if he really does have friends at Hogwarts at all. This is something that Dudley teases him about. We learn that Harry is suffering from perhaps post-traumatic stress from having to encounter and subsequently fight the murderer of his parents and the most terrifying wizard in the world. He has not received any help or counseling and has in fact been sent back into his abusive and negligent home. He suffers from cold sweats and nightmares. He's often wondering where Voldemort might be now and where he might encounter him next. The reason the Dursleys are more stressed than usual today is because Mr. Dursley is having a client over to his house. He's trying to do a drill deal. The commission would apparently enable the Dursleys to buy that summer house in Majorca they've been talking about. Harry doesn't have enough to eat when he's here, but they might summer in Majorca. Anyway, so Harry spends the day being forced to help Petunia clean the house because Dudley had been taunting Harry about not having any friends on his birthday, and Harry had said like hocus pocus, wiggly boogly, something like that. And Dudley got scared, so Harry's being punished, and now he has to do all of these chores. He gets no food until the chores are done, and when the chores are completed, his birthday dinner is 2 pieces of bread. After these 2 pieces of bread, Harry is meant to be up in his room, pretending that he doesn't exist. But plans go awry because when he arrives in his room, someone is already in it. Dobby is a house elf, and house elves are commonly slaves. We're gonna have to breathe through some of this. House elves are capable of vast and complicated magic, even without the conduit of a wand. They're not bound by the same constraints as wizards, and yet they serve their wizard masters as if they are their superiors. Dobby reveals to Harry that house elves are bound to serve one family for all of time, and Dobby himself is unable to speak a word against or in defiance of his masters, without then being forced to inflict punishment on himself. So Dobby engages in a lot of self-harm. JKR was like, how am I going to start my children's series? How about, so this is the immediate tension in the book. Harry is supposed to be avoiding making noise to avoid punishment from the Dursleys, and for some reason there's an otherwise unknown creature in his bedroom routinely banging his head into the cabinetry, screaming, crying, and making a ton of noise. Something that goes on throughout the series is Harry becoming disillusioned to the idea that sentient creatures are meant to have the same value or be treated equally, even if they're not human. We're gonna talk about this. So Harry, obviously, because Dobby is sentient and clearly experiencing him, and obviously has feelings they're quite on display, treats Dobby as an equal, someone worthy of manners and kindness, and Harry is a polite kid. Regardless, he would talk to anyone this way. And it sends Dobby even further into his tailspin. We're meant to understand that Harry treating Dobby with some measure of respect, which again is just being like, hey, sorry to be rude, but I don't want you here right now. This behavior separates Harry not just from cruel wizards that abuse Dobby, his master, sisters, but also from other wizards that have just been conditioned and socialized to think that house elves don't matter. The reason that Dobby is in Harry's room is to try to convince him, or otherwise coerce him, to not return to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry this year. Dobby insists that there is a sinister plot that is going to be enacted this year that very well may endanger Harry's life, that Harry might even be the target of said plot. And the reason that Dobby has that information is because that plot is coming straight from the house that Dobby works in. So he can't reveal much to Harry about the details of the plot or why it's dangerous. All he can do is his best. So he gives Harry these small clues that don't make a ton of sense and punishes himself in between. Dobby probes Harry about how nice it can really even be at Hogwarts if his friends don't write to him all summer. And Harry's like, how do you know my friends don't write to me? And Dobby's like, don't be mad at me, but I withheld your mail, hoping that if you thought that your friends didn't like you anymore, you wouldn't return to school. Dobby has been hoarding all of Harry's mail and hopes that he will feel abandoned by his friends and will just abandon the wizarding world. This is the second year in a row his mail has been stolen from him. This man is like, can I please just get my mail? Anyway, after Harry confirms not just his greatness, but his kindness for Dobby, Dobby doubles down on his efforts. Dobby sends a big bowl of pudding flying through the air and crashing to the ground, drenching the Dursleys' kitchen and their esteemed guests in the dessert. Dobby snaps himself out of the Dursley household. House elves are able to apparate in and out of anywhere. They have no restrictions, leaving Harry to clean up this mess. Harry says Vernon might have still made that deal if it weren't for the owl, though. A barn owl swoops into their house and drops a letter for Harry, and it sends the Dursleys' guests fleeing from the room, believing this to be some sick joke because clearly the Dursleys knew that they had an aversion to the aviary community. The letter loudly scolds Harry for using underage magic outside of school, and it warns him that if these instances are to continue, he may face expulsion. This sends Harry into a panic. He didn't use the magic, and unfortunately, it reveals for the Dursleys that Harry is of no threat to them if he wants to return to school. This prompts the Dursleys to install literal bars on Harry's window, and they pay someone $50 to do this. They don't even do their own dirty work, which makes no sense. Has he snuck out of the window before? Why do they think he's a flight risk? And to really double down on the misery, he's no longer allowed to leave his room. They install a cat door on his door, and about once a day, Petunia will deliver a cold can of soup through this cat door, and Harry eats half of it, and he gives the other half to Hedwig. Harry is downtrodden and miserable and very isolated. He feels really, really alone, and he's afraid because he thinks he may never be able to return to Hogwarts. He can't magic himself out of his new prison because then he might be expelled and there'd be no Hogwarts to return to. Harry only endures this for a few days, though, before he wakes up to find Ronald Weasley attempting to break into his window. Fred, George, and Ron have borrowed their father's car and flown it across the country to come and rescue Harry. When Harry wasn't responding to any of their letters, they figured something was wrong. They don't know about phones. And it's at least we have Ron looking out for Harry. Where are all the adults? So the reason that their car can fly is because it's been illegally enchanted by their father, who's obsessed with all Muggle goods. They use a rope, tie the car to the bars, pull the bars off the window, and Fred and George pick Harry's lock on his door, go down to the cupboard on the stairs, and rescue his broomstick and books. The four boys escape triumphant into the night air with a screaming Dursley in their wake. And I'm just why do they want to cage him? You're sick. I don't get it. Don't they want him out of their hair? We are, in contrast to the first book, immediately plunged into the magical and wonderful world that is the Weasley Burrow. Harry details the events that led to his imprisonment, and he explains Dobby the house elf. And the boys say that Mrs. Weasley is always saying she wishes they had a house elf to do the ironing. Which, a page later, we see her flick her wand to do the dishes. Why? Fred and George reveal what they know of the Malfoy family. They've heard their father discussing Lucius Malfoy, Draco Malfoy's dad, because they work together at the Ministry of Magic. Apparently, he's a big supporter of you-know-who. Dobby is the Malfoy's house elf. Anyway, the boys arrive back at the Burrow safely in the wee hours of the morning. Ron seems a little bit nervous about what Harry might think of his somewhat ramshackle house. None of it fits together. It's clear each piece has been added after each child was born, worn, which to Harry gives it a quite individual and homey look, but to Ron, who has been bullied for most of his life for not living in a manor or on an estate of some kind, feels quite insecure about it. He's also just seen the Dursleys' house and is immediately comparing the resources that he believes Harry to have there to the resources that Ron has here. The boys are advising Harry on how to sneak into the house without Mrs. Weasley noticing when they're greeted by a fuming Mrs. Weasley. Mrs. Weasley is so pissed. These boys stole an illegal car. She lists the 3 worst things that could have happened. In this order, she says you could have died, you could have been seen, and your father could lose his job. Mrs. Weasley has just implied for us the direness of the Wizard Secrecy Act, something that Harry can't have too deep an understanding of because he hasn't been socialized in the world, right? Harry's only a child and this is an entirely new culture. So we as the reader start to understand the importance of muggles not seeing wizards do magic. Losing one's livelihood, the only source of income for this family, comes second to being seen by muggles as it relates to danger factors. After a proper scolding, she feeds the boys an enormous breakfast, and Harry remarks that the main difference, besides all the magic, between the Dursleys and here is that everyone seems to like him at the Burrow. When Ron shows Harry his room, it's covered in merch from his favorite Quidditch team, and everything is bright orange, and there's one tiny window. And Ron says it's quite small compared to the enormous room you have at the Dursleys. Ron perhaps does not know about the cupboard under the stairs. Harry loves the Burrow immediately. As punishment for their illegal behavior, Mrs. Weasley makes them de-gnome the garden, which consists of pulling gnomes up by their heads, swinging them around lasso style, and launching them into the neighboring yards. They're trying to make them dizzy so they can't find their way back to their homes inside the Weasley garden. We don't know if having gnomes threatens the structural integrity of one's house. We don't know if the gnomes are feeding off of the garden goods. We don't know why it's important to de-gnome the garden, but we do know that when Mr. Weasley de-gnomes the garden, he's soft on the gnomes. There doesn't really seem to be any reason to be doing the de-gnoming because we learn that the gnomes do routinely, in fact, find their way back. It seems just mean and cruel. And when Ron sees Harry's hesitation, he's like, that is a sentient creature who is experiencing you whirling around by its head and flinging it away. Ron is like, don't feel bad for them. They're stupid. What? And then Harry, to convince those of us that still might have reservations about hurting something simply because it might not be as smart as Ron, Harry's like, and one bit me when I was trying to softly launch it across the yard, so obviously they deserve what they get. What? Harry meets Arthur Weasley, Mr. Weasley, for the first time, and he's returning after a long night of raids. Mr. Weasley is a sort of wizard cop that protects muggles specifically from wizard schemes and magical objects designed to swindle or hurt them. He conducts raids on other wizards' houses who might be suspected of hoarding illicit magical objects. He gets to do this under the Muggle Protection Act, an act he penned himself. This is a government official to confiscate illegally bewitched items and make the world a safer place for muggles. He's pretty obsessed with muggles to the point where obviously he bought and took apart this muggle car and then infused it with some sort of magic and now it can fly. And he says something there's technically a loophole in the law for if the builder never had any intention to drive it. And Mrs. Weasley's like, you wrote the law. You wrote that loophole into the law. He comes in from a long night of work raiding other wizards' houses. He's routinely bullied for what he's passionate about despite the fact that he's on the right side of justice. The Weasleys are actually regarded as one of the most prominent pureblood families, and yet he's willing to dedicate his life to something that doesn't get him a lot of respect. He's good at his job, and when he comes back from this long night to greet his big family, which does subsist on the one income, right? They have 7 children. This is a family of 9 that subsists on one income. He obviously makes some money. Anyway, so he comes back, he greets his large family, and Mrs. Weasley is like, your sons did something wrong. And he's like, oh my God, hello. And he greets Harry Potter. He is so kind. Just every line he says, I agree with. I'm like, wow, is Mr. Weasley hot? He's my hear me out, I guess. And he's like, OMG, Harry Potter, nice to meet you. Ron's been talking about you all summer. And it's cool because the Weasley family doesn't greet him as Harry Potter, the legendary icon. They greet him as Ron's friend Harry. And then he's like, wow, so the car worked? Harry spends the rest of the summer vacation at the Burrow, practicing Quidditch and living amongst the Weasley brood. He is loved, cared for, fed, shown affection, and he's appreciated in this home. The Weasleys have this owl named Errol, and he is truly on death's door. And it's something that Ron feels really ashamed about. This is an alive animal, okay, that does this family's bidding. And he's like laboring. Like whenever Earl delivers a letter, he tends to like collapse in a heap into some food, which I can't imagine is pleasant for Earl. He plunks into the nearest glass of juice and needs breaks in between deliveries. Justice for Earl. Anyway, soon they all hear from Hogwarts via Earl. Like, he does get the job done. And they receive their letters with their list of school supplies. On that list of school supplies are 7 new textbooks written by Gilderoy Lockhart, the wizarding world's most charming author. And that is JK immediately linking Auror, Dark Wizard Hunter, and author, which are 2 words that are almost comprised of entirely the same letters, and I wonder what she's saying about authors. I don't disagree with it, I just think it's interesting. So the students wonder, this entire collection of work, it means that their new defense against the dark arts teacher is maybe a fan. They suspect she's a witch. The Weasley children casually fret and wonder about how they might be able to afford 5 sets of 8 new textbooks. Mrs. Weasley assures them that they'll find a way to make it work. Harry feels really uncomfortable with his wealth because he's never had it before. And a piece of his identity is as a person that goes without. He doesn't even really long for things. The possibility of receiving the things that he might want was a literal impossibility for the first 11 years of his life. So to hear that the Weasleys have taken him in, fed him, cared for him, the only people in his living memory who have ever done this, have to worry about scraping together the gold for school supplies while Harry has this big vault of cash, evokes a sort of guilt in him. He seems to have sort of intuited or maybe gleaned from Muggle life that talking about money is a sort of taboo subject because he never says anything about it. We learn of the other, up until now, absent Weasley brothers, the 2 eldest boys, Bill and Charlie. Bill, the eldest Weasley boy, received top marks. He got 12 owls, or ordinary wizarding levels, and was awarded the title of head boy, a real honor. He is currently in Egypt working closely with Gringotts, the wizard bank. Charlie, the second oldest boy, is currently in Romania working with dragons. The older brothers leave big shoes to fill. The Weasley children speculate that the reason there's so many of them is because Mrs. Weasley really wanted a girl, and so they were going to keep having children until they got a girl, and they did. They got Jenny. And thus Ron, the youngest boy, recognizes himself as the least wanted. Percy deals with his own lack of individuation by studying furiously and by strict adherence to the rules. We learn from Harry that the Weasley household is a pretty rambunctious one. There's a lot of people here and there's not a ton of space or privacy. It makes sense that he adapts a certain superiority as it relates to rule following or restriction or order from chaos. Fred and George obviously have company in one another and are perpetually wreaking havoc, and now Ron is known as best friend to Harry Potter. Ron has also received word from Hermione, and she admonishes him for maybe doing something illegal to rescue Harry. She's like, you both get in trouble. She reveals that she will be in Diagon Alley later this week with her parents to purchase their new school supplies, and they all arrange to meet up. Because the Weasleys are poor, they have to travel by Floo powder. Of course, they're almost out of it because the abundance of people in their house and their lack of resources mean they're almost out of everything all the time. So traveling by Floo powder means traveling by chimney, ultimately. The magic Floo powder acts as a sort of propellant through the chimneys in the area. Harry has never traveled this way, and thus the Weasleys take turns demonstrating for him. They tell him that you take a pinch of the Floo powder, you throw it to the floor, and you very clearly yell the name of your destination, the chimney portal you'd like to be transported to. It's up to the traveler to step out of the chimney at the right gate. Harry watches Fred and George and Mr. Weasley poof out of existence before stepping into the grate himself. He's supposed to keep his eyes open so he can step out of the grate. He's supposed to speak clearly, but when he dashes the powder to the floor, it's very warm and he inhales a bunch of it, and so he's coughing when he says Diagon Alley. In the movie, they make young Daniel Radcliffe say diagonally, but he doesn't say diagonally. He says diagonally. Diagonally! He is spun into the city and the Weasleys don't know where he'll end up. I believe it's meant to symbolize public transit, a means of getting around that had the potential to leave one feeling dirty, haggard, nauseous, and perhaps disgruntled due to circumstances outside of one's control. Often dropped not exactly where one had intended. I think it's a little clever. I think it's a little bit the symbolism of someone who does not prefer to travel this way. I'd rather take the train than the death machines that we call cars. obviously all of these characters exist in London, and in the UK, the government hadn't sold out its people to the auto industry, so that option is available to them, unlike in America, which is where I'm filming this video right now. But to me, it just gives us what I think is insight into her personal opinion about public transportation in London. It just communicates something, that's all. Because Harry did not articulate clearly where he wants to go, he's essentially on the subway alone for the first time as a 12-year-old, and he accidentally ends up where he's not supposed to be, in a pretty dangerous place. He's landed in Borgin and Burke's. It's a seedy secondhand shop in Knockturn Alley. Nocturnally. Borgin and Burke's deals in trades of objects enchanted with dark magic. Harry is lost and confused and covered in soot and trying to figure out how he's going to find his way to Diagon Alley when who walks into this illicit store but Draco Malfoy and his father, Lucius. Harry overhears that Lucius is looking to sell several objects, haggling for the right price with the slimy and simpering store owner. He actually discloses that the reason he's selling these items is because of Arthur Weasley's inconvenient Muggle Protection Act. He worries that his status at the Ministry may not much longer protect him if Arthur were to come calling. Bristles at the idea that his name may no longer command the same respect that it once did, and that Malfoy Manor may once again be subject to the law. Harry also hears Draco's dad chastise him for not befriending Harry. He says it may not be most prudent to exhibit a disdain for the defeater of the Dark Lord, not when his family were known converters, and indeed inner circle members for Lord Voldemort in his heyday. Apparently, Lucius was able to avoid imprisonment and keep his seat of power at the Ministry of Magic in the government and over the school by swapping allegiances near the end, when it was clear that the light had defeated the dark for the moment. He reported on his fellow Death Eaters, ultimately prioritized his own safety over the cause that he committed his life to. He claimed, like many others, that he was unaware of the atrocious acts that he was committing because he did them only under the Imperious Curse, which is one of the 3 forbidden curses. The Imperious Curse, if placed upon you, forces you to act without your consent. So he's saying he was puppeteered to commit all the evil that he did. And also his family's pureblood status and their enormous amount of wealth, for whatever reason, probably corruption, Lucius Malfoy has evaded imprisonment and punishment. Is only now, 12 years later, ridding himself of some of the more compromising items in his home. Harry manages to escape from the shop, emerging into this sketchy alley. He's immediately approached, kind of bombarded by a witch, maybe selling fingernails. He's immediately saved by Hagrid, who's like, oh my god, Harry, what are you doing in Knockturn Alley? This place is so sketchy. Apparently it's known for dark wizards and dark magic, and it's not a safe place for a child, but it's not a place that any upstanding citizen would really find themselves. And Harry's like, well, I was lost. Wait a second, what are you doing here? And Hagrid says he was buying flesh-eating slug repellent, and this is supposed to flick a light of suspicion as it relates to Hagrid for us, but I mean, come on, it doesn't. Hagrid delivers Harry to Diagon Alley and to Hermione, Ron, and the very worried Weasley family. He's surprised that Harry's with the Weasleys at all, and he asks Harry about the Dursleys. Harry confides that the Dursleys had locked him up and were starving him, and Hagrid is like, if I'd have known. And I'd like to know what the end of that sentence is. If you'd have known what, Hagrid? If you'd have known they were going to be abusive, you wouldn't have dropped him there on that first night? You wouldn't have left Harry there? Hello? Anyway, the families, including Hermione's parents, much to Mr. Weasley's excitement, enter Gringotts to grab their cash so that they can go buy all of their supplies. Harry averts his eyes as they stop at the Weasley's vault, and he sees Mrs. Weasley literally sweep the corners of their vault for any lingering gold, because it's nearly empty. And then Harry has to go collect gold from his vault, which is just like bursting with gold, and he's really embarrassed, and he just like scoops up some cash and like stuffs it in his pockets. After sharing ice cream cones and collecting supplies, all the children and family head to the bookstore to collect their books. And it's busy, it's bumping, because none other than Gilderoy Lockhart is there, and he's actually signing books. At this moment in the bookstore, a photographer for the Daily Prophet steps on Ron to pull Harry into a picture with Gilderoy Lockhart. Harry at one point in time tries not to feel jealous of Ron and his rambunctious family when he thinks of returning to the Dursleys, and I think that's an interesting line in there, because Ron, I think, does a very good job keeping a handle on his jealousy, if he feels it, throughout the entirety of the series. I personally think that the movies work overtime as it relates to the character assassination of Ron and kind of all the Weasley boys. This child routinely has a positive attitude in the books. He's an upstanding citizen, he's facing his fears, and and he never demonstrates a soreness as it relates to what Harry has and what he does not. So they go into the bookstore, and I'm not the only person in the world that reads these books and thinks that Harry is undoubtedly bisexual. But I'm also bisexual, so perhaps, I just can't imagine a world where sexuality isn't a spectrum. But there's a lot of reasons that the fandom thinks that Harry might be one of the LGBTs, a member of the LGBTQ community. And we'll dive into a lot more of those reasons during Half-Blood Prince for obvious reasons. But whenever a man is handsome, Harry is gonna tell us about it, okay? He makes a real point to emphasize how handsome this man is. And I'm gonna contrast at one point in time the paragraphs between the girls that Harry's interested in and the men around Harry, and then you decide for yourself. Just point by point comparison. Anyway, his first description of Gilderoy Lockhart, that Lockhart was wearing robes of forget-me-not blue that exactly matched his eyes. Forget-me-not matched his Harry. Anyway, we learn pretty quickly that Gilderoy Lockhart is perhaps not all he's made himself out to be through his own works and also through, the articles written about him in Witches Weekly. It's pretty immediately clear to Ron and Harry that he's a total flop. He seems pretty obsessed with his appearance and his own celebrity, and he's often rude. And he seems to perhaps be competing with the child Harry Potter as it relates to knownness or most notable status. He's quite vain, and he announces to the bookstore that he will in fact be taking up the post of Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher at Hogwarts this year. Keep in mind that all the children have the same teachers, so whether you're a first year or a sixth year, you've got Snape for potions, you've got Lockhart for Defense Against the Dark Arts. So this entire generation is not receiving an education as it relates to defending themselves from the literal evil that continues to build around them. So this means that Lockhart has tasked the entire school with purchasing his entire collection of works. So the Weasleys are going to pull whatever cash they can to get whatever books they can get secondhand so their children don't go without. But they really don't even need these books. They're just feeding Lockhart's royalties. Sucks. I do think JKR is perhaps making a point about authorship and fame simply because of how well the first Harry Potter book did. After these books were released, their instant popularity sort of skyrocketed JKR, who had a pretty difficult time publishing these works, to immediate stardom. And JKR has shared that a piece of her story was at one point in time being unhoused and being a single mother herself. So I wonder if she identifies a piece of herself in Harry, who goes from having ultimately nothing to having a ton of everything, including attention and notoriety. A person thrust into celebrity and wealth, suddenly regarded as equal to by other celebrities, or perhaps finding herself competed with. Despite the fact that we, the reader, can tell that Lockhart is an absolute flop from the top, it takes all the women in the book, including Hermione, that's read all of his books and will sit in his class pretty much the entirety of the book to see past his charm and good looks. Please. Lockhart gives Harry his entire works free of charge. Harry immediately dumps them all into Jenny and is like, here, you have the books. Mutters something about buying his own. Then we get an altercation between the Weasley family and the Malfoy family. Draco Malfoy taunts Jenny about being poor, which is just not clever or even particularly insulting. He asks if her family will go hungry for a month so that she can afford her books. What? And then Lucius Malfoy, the adult man, starts in. And after a few quips at his children, he eventually starts attacking Mr. Weasley himself. He asks Mr. Weasley what the point of being the disgrace of the wizarding world is if they don't even pay you well for it. This is a reflection of Lucius Malfoy's values. We can, as the reader, immediately note him as someone that is corruptible, that will do whatever it takes for money. And Arthur says, you and I have very different ideas about what disgraces the wizarding name. Ugh, I'm hot. Okay. It's not when he's insulting Mr. Weasley personally or his family that Mr. Weasley snaps. It's when Malfoy disrespects Muggles and Hermione's parents that Mr. Weasley then gets into a brawl with Lucius Malfoy. He throws hands. He said, I will stand up for what I know is right. Are you kidding? He stepped in to protect his family. He stood up to the bully. And, sometimes you gotta fight when you're a man, I guess. Didn't throw hands until someone said something bigoted. He said, I'm not afraid of you. He said, we're colleagues. See you at work. We later learned that Lucius Malfoy had been goading Mr. Weasley or the Weasley family into an altercation so that Lucius could slip one of his dark arts materials into the cauldron of 11-year-old Jenny Weasley. Hagrid breaks up the fight, and everyone with a more subdued attitude hits the leaky cauldron for an end-of-day beverage. And then the Weasleys return home with Harry, likely via flu powder. Harry relays to us that his month at the Burrow has been the happiest of his life. On the night before they all head off to Hogwarts, Mrs. Weasley makes him all his favorite foods. They have this big family dinner, and then the next morning is a flurry of chaos and cases and trying to get everyone into the car and last-minute return trips home for forgotten items. And the point is, the Weasleys and Harry are running very, very late for the train that's going to leave King's Cross from platform 9 3/4. As each child runs as inconspicuously as possible through a crowded King's Cross, ticks closer and closer to the train departing. Harry and Ron go last, moving to run through the platform together, and at the moment they're supposed to slip through the wall, they end up crashing into it, and all of their books and cases go flying, and Hedwig goes flying, and she's like squawking about, and all these commuters are like, "Get out of my way, kid." They're just trying to go to work. Harry and Ron wrongly conclude that perhaps they were just too late and the platform seals itself off right before the train departs. And instead of waiting for their parents, who are literally feet away, they decide they'll just fly the car to Hogwarts. It has an invisibility feature. What could go wrong? Underage wizards are allowed to use magic if the situation is an emergency, and I am truly baffled and confused about what about this situation is emergent. They decide that it's fine, they're going to take the car. They're not even really leaving the Weasleys stranded because Mr. and Mrs. Weasley are fully grown witch and wizard and they can apparate anywhere, anytime. So Ron and Harry get in the car and Ron is like, "Make sure no one's looking." What? You can't tell if you're being perceived. Immediately a flaw. How are you gonna make sure you're not being well, they fly the car above the train, snacking on toffee and basking in the sun and their boyhoodness. It's not long though before they both get really hot and really hungry and really thirsty and wish that they were on the train. As they're about to arrive at the castle, the car starts to die. Not used to long trips or any trips and unable to sustain its height, the car starts to plummet toward the castle grounds. It dies right in the air and ends up crashing into the Whomping Willow. The crash, because Ron had taken out his wand and attempted to stop them from dying through magic, actually results in Ron's wand breaking nearly in half. As they've landed in the car and are trying to absorb the fact that they're still alive, the tree starts fighting back and smashing the car with its branches and throwing branches through the window, and like it's a whole thing. The car, of its own volition, reverses itself out of the tree, ejects the boys and boots all of their stuff from the trunk, and then drives off into the Forbidden Forest with the energy of an abused animal, I would say. The boys saddle up to the side of the castle and through a window are able to see the feast going on. It evokes memories of winning the House Cup last year, Gryffindor being crowned winner, and defeating Slytherin's 7-year streak. Harry observes Lockhart once again in gorgeous blue robes, and Hagrid drinking deeply from his cup. The boys are unable to locate Snape at the professor's table, though, prompting them to wonder where he might be, and then they make some jokes at his expense. Maybe he got sacked, maybe he decided to leave because he didn't get the Defense Against the Dark Arts position. They enjoy making fun of Snape because he spent last year torturing them. Anyway, who turns up behind him? But Professor Snape himself. He's overheard them. He says maybe he's not there because he was sent to see why you boys didn't arrive on the train. Snape informs the boys that they were in fact seen by Muggles. He hauls them off into his office. He says this is a very grave offense, and if you were under my jurisdiction, you would be expelled. He goes to get McGonagall and Dumbledore, and the boys start to really fret. McGonagall first asks them to explain themselves, which is cool, and I think says a lot about her character, and then she impresses upon them the severity of the situation. And they're super worried about expulsion. And let me remind you that expulsion from this wizarding school means having your magical conduit snapped in half, being barred from practicing magic ever again in your life. So these are pretty serious stakes. They explained that they couldn't get onto the platform and they didn't know what to do, so they figured they'd just fly the car. It makes sense that in moments of panic, Harry consistently forgets that he's a wizard because it doesn't seem like they're using too much magic in school, particularly not in stressful situations. And obviously he hasn't been a wizard his entire life. And when McGonagall points out that they could have used Hedwig to communicate with the school, he's like, oh yeah, I did have an owl. But this makes sense too. I buy that he forgot this because again, the Dursleys locked up Hedwig all summer and he hadn't been thinking of her as a tool or a resource that he could use. So I get it. I buy it. I also think the point is that they wanted to take the car. You know, it wasn't that bad of an option. They did have these sort of delusions of grandeur, imagining everyone jealous and clapping for them as they land triumphantly on the school grounds. So, you know. And, of course, he's not used to help or guidance. It makes sense to me that they irrationally solved this problem on their own, and it also makes sense to me that they were later not punished for it. Because, or not really punished for it, Dumbledore needs to make sure that Harry follows his instructions, sure. But he also needs to make sure that Harry is resourceful and can get by with out-of-the-box thinking. It's decided that the boys aren't expelled, but they are going to live the rest of the year with the threat of expulsion over their heads if they step another toe out of line. And before McGonagall doles out that punishment, Harry is like, and just so you know, we took the car before the term started yet, so I don't think that Gryffindor should lose any sort of points because it wasn't Gryffindor's fault. And that's probably a goddamn trauma reaction from last year when he lost them all those points and then got bullied. So McGonagall doesn't take points from Gryffindor. They're not permitted to go back to the feast, and Ron guesses that it's because they don't want the rest of the students like clapping and cheering for them. So they instead eat a bunch of sandwiches from an ever-replenishing plate, and then they head back to the dormitory. McGonagall informs them that Jenny was sorted into Gryffindor house. When the boys head back to the common room, they run into Hermione, who is cross with them for breaking the law, but she tells them the password and they all go in. They enter the common room to cheers and claps, and they are celebrated as heroes who managed to fly the car all the way to school. They head up to their room, which we learn they get to keep throughout their entire education experience, and now over their door it just says second year Gryffindors. Harry and Ron share a room with the 3 other Gryffindor boys in their year, which are Seamus, Neville, and Dean, which implies that there are only 5 Gryffindor boys in their year, which, you know, like JK, like, the math ain't mathin'. The next morning at breakfast, Ron receives a howler from Mrs. Weasley. And a howler is the type of letter that it seems to be an audio message of sorts that you don't get to choose the volume of, that is going to release itself in front of all of your peers. So in the dining hall, Ron is loudly scolded by Mrs. Weasley. She tells him that he is in enormous trouble for stealing and wrecking his parents' car, for breaking wizard law. She tells him that she's ashamed and that Mr. Weasley is now facing an inquiry at work. Ownership of that car is not contingent with the law that he wrote and passed. Yikes. Harry feels really bad about this, basically sick. He can't believe he's responsible for any trouble that has befallen the Weasleys. He feels really bad. They took such good care of him. He loves them profoundly. Let's talk about herbology and the mandrakes. The second year Gryffindors have their first class with the Hufflepuffs, and they're going to be in Greenhouse 3. They're really excited about that because when they were first years, they only ever got to go into Greenhouse 1, and Greenhouse 3 houses more exotic and dangerous magical plants. As the kids head into Greenhouse 3, they see their usually cheerful and smiling herbology teacher, Professor Sprout, attempting to disengage from conversation with Gilderoy Lockhart, who seems to be patronizing her, insisting that he doesn't know more about herbology than her, even though it may seem that way. Lockhart spots Harry and asks/demands to speak to him before class and shuts Professor Sprout's door in her face. Lockhart cautions Harry about attention-seeking, performing dangerous stunts for publicity, like driving the car from the train. Lockhart assumes that he's given Harry a taste for fame since the picture they took in the bookstore ended up on the front page of the Daily Prophet, and he calls Harry a nobody and insists that someday he'll be somebody of meaning or of worth, which just immediately discredits Lockhart because Harry is literally Superman. He's Superman wizard baby. Harry, finally released by Lockhart, heads into class, and we learn that Professor Sprout actually waited for him to get there. That's cool. Today, the students will be repotting mandrakes, which, when fully grown, can be harvested and used in most antidotes, but the fully grown mandrake cry can be fatal, so they're all wearing earmuffs. The students repot the baby mandrakes, and Harry, Ron, and Hermione share a table with Justin Fitch-Fletchley, who reveals himself to be Muggle-born, and whom probably would have a lot in common with Harry, who was raised by Muggles, and Hermione, who is Muggle-born herself. But because of the task today, they don't have much time to chat, and Justin doesn't have time to get to know Harry's character before they all put on earmuffs. Something else that's going on, and that will go on all year, is that Ron's wand is broken. He refuses to write to his family about it. And I think we as the reader are meant to understand that there is one, yes, the shame component of this. He thinks he's going to get in more trouble for breaking his wand. But two, I think it's the resources component. A new wand is expensive. So his wand straight up doesn't work. It's actually a hazard. And whenever he attempts to perform spells, it usually backfires or something explodes. Like, imagine going to school and not having a pen all year. He just can't practice magic all year. What? Like, the stress of this as a child, it almost took me out. We also meet Colin Creevey, who is also a Muggle-born first year. His dad is a milkman. I personally love Colin Creevey deeply, and you may not feel that way at the end of this book, but I have a strong emotional attachment to him for whatever reason. He just makes my heart ache. I don't know. He has a camera, and he's trying to capture all these cool magical things from the wizarding world so he can send back pictures to his milkman dad. Oh my god. But he kind of like fangirls the famous Harry Potter, and Harry finds him at best annoying and at worst quite embarrassing. Because Colin is taking photos of Harry and even asking Harry to sign them, Malfoy comes up and taunts Harry about like giving out signed photographs, taunts Harry for his big-headedness. Lockhart comes over and sort of like saves Harry from Malfoy, and he assures Harry that handing out signed photographs at this stage in his career is a little bit ill-advised. Their kids have their first class with Lockhart, and Lockhart gives them a pre-test. The questions are not about defense against the dark arts or even about the creatures that Lockhart's books depict him defeating, but are entirely about Lockhart and his preferences and his personality. Lockhart, for this first lesson, has brought pixies into the classroom for a demonstration, and when noticing the snickering that comes from the classroom, he releases them onto the unsuspecting students. There's immediate pandemonium. The pixies are like ripping out textbook pages, they're breaking things, and several of them hang Neville from the chandelier, and when the bell rings, most of the students flee. Lockhart tasks Harry, Ron, and Hermione with collecting the pixies. Hermione brilliantly employs an immobilizing spell that freezes all the pixies in the air, and the children collect them and put them back in the cage, which, also evokes ethical questions. At this point, Hermione is still defending Lockhart, insisting that maybe he just wanted to give his students some hands-on experience. It has the effect of making our most brilliant character in the book seem unable to believe that this handsome and charming hero is anything but what he presents himself to be, despite all evidence to the contrary, and I find it quite unbelievable, particularly because we know who Hermione is and we watch her engage with other men throughout the series, but it's pretty annoying. It's reducing nearly all the women down in the book to people that can't see past pretense. And I have a problem with that. Oliver Wood. It's time to talk about Oliver. Oliver Wood is a 6th year, and he's Harry's Quidditch captain. He wakes Harry up at 5 a.m. on the first Saturday of the semester, and he gets the team together, and he lays down the game plan. He lays down the law. Wood really, really, really wants to win the Quidditch Cup, and he doesn't have very many opportunities left because you only go to Hogwarts for 7 years. Gryffindor was actually unable to win last year due to circumstances outside of their control, aka Harry was passed out in the hospital wing because he had just fought the Dark Lord and succeeded once again. Apparently, while he was passed out, Gryffindor sustained its worst loss in 300 years. So that's pretty disappointing for Oliver. Poor Oliver. But not this year, Wood says. He lectures the team on their new and rigorous training program and the plan that he's been agonizing over all summer. They don't get to put that plan into practice immediately, though, because when they head out to the Quidditch pitch, there's another team walking onto the field, the Slytherin team. Wood tells the Slytherins to clear out. They book the field for today, but the Slytherins say tough luck because we have a note from Snape that says that we get to override your scheduling in order to train our new seeker. There are no girls on the Slytherin Quidditch team, and that makes them look like bad guys. The point of that is that they suck. Their new seeker is, of course, Draco Malfoy, whose daddy has purchased the entire Slytherin team the latest and greatest brooms. Every single one of them got the new Nimbus 2001. Incredible pieces of machinery that will hopefully make up for their lack of talent. Colin, Hermione, and Ron, who had intention to watch Quidditch practice, are headed down to the field to see what's up. Hermione says, well, at least no one in Gryffindor had to buy their way onto the team, and Malfoy calls Hermione a mudblood. Ron attempts to hex Malfoy in retaliation for the horrible slur and accidentally hexes himself. Unfortunately, he is now belching up slugs of various sizes. That is horrible. Poor Ron. One. Harry and Hermione half walk, half carry Ron to Hagrid's, who might know what to do, but Hagrid ultimately tells them that they just have to wait it out. Better out than in, I always say. Before they enter Hagrid's hut, though, they see Lockhart leaving. Hagrid says that he doesn't believe a word of what Lockhart says. Hermione again defends Lockhart, employing the same logic that the respected and powerful wizards will come to know later in the series. Like, that's what they'll say. She ends up saying, hey, well, that's not fair. Obviously, Dumbledore thinks Lockhart is the right man for the job, so if you trust Dumbledore. And Hagrid reveals that actually Lockhart was the only man for the job. Apparently, there are rumors going around the Defense Against the Dark Arts position is hexed or cursed or jinxed in some way. The kids tell Hagrid that Malfoy used this slur with Hermione, and that's why Ron is belching up slugs. And Hagrid is pretty aghast. He explains that mudblood is meant to mean dirty blood. He says it's a horrible name for someone who's of Muggle descent, which Hagrid tells us is most witches and wizards these days. There aren't very many of the magical population, and if they hadn't mated with Muggles, the wizards would have died out. So again, anyone of pure blood is likely inbred somewhere along the line. There's a whole crew of wizards, namely those that hail from Slytherin, that believe in blood status, believe that who a person is born to should grant them a certain entitlement to power, authority, and ultimately superiority. Probably because those people don't believe that they can succeed or thrive on their own merit. Anyway, Hagrid gives Harry some shit about signed photographs, and they all go back up to the castle. McGonagall finds Harry and Ron to give them their detention for breaking the law. Ron is supposed to do his detention with Filch. He's going to be polishing all the trophies in the trophy room. No magic, just elbow grease. And Harry spends over 4 hours helping Lockhart sign his fan mail. Both he and Ron feel they've gotten the worst deal. Harry has been working on this fan mail for upwards of 4 hours when he hears this terrifying voice very close to him. And he asks Lockhart if he can hear that, and Lockhart says he can't, and he dismisses Harry shortly afterward. When Harry confides in Ron and Hermione, they have reason to suspect that maybe Lockhart was lying because their last Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher turned out to be a literal puppet for enemy number 1. So Ron tells Harry that even in the wizarding world, hearing voices that no one else can is not such a good sign. Which, like, I think that's JK's own internalized stigma, potentially about mental illness. This is a world with freaking ghosts wandering around all the place. People that turn into animals. Like, it's a weird jab at like something like schizophrenia or any auditory hallucination that doesn't need to be in there. Does not seem to be a reflection of the child character whose mouth those lines are coming out of, but out of the author herself. Later one night, Harry's coming back from a really intense and rainy Quidditch practice, and he's covered in mud and dirt. Oliver Wood has doubled his efforts, given that Slytherin now has this new state-of-the-art equipment. Harry's coming back into the castle when he runs into Nearly Headless Nick. Nearly Headless Nick is obviously a ghost, and he is distraught because he has once again been rejected from joining the Headless Hunt. Nearly Headless Nick wasn't fully decapitated, and obviously no one is more disappointed about this than him. Harry is being kind, I don't know, maybe just kind of not being rude, and I guess indulging Nearly Headless Nick when Filch happens around the corner and gets pissed at Harry for being muddy in his clean halls, and Filch drags Harry down to his office. He's going to make an example of Harry. He's going to give him detention. When an enormous bang overhead distracts Filch, he goes to check it out, assuming that it's Peeves, the castle's poltergeist, and Harry waits in Filch's office. And on Filch's desk, he sees a quick spell book. It's a beginner's guide to magic. Harry can't understand why Filch would need it, unless, of course, he can't do magic. When Filch comes back, he sort of seems to have forgotten that he was about to punish Harry. He says to Mrs. Norris, the vanishing cabinet was so valuable. Like, foreshadowing, that's 4 books away. Also, I'm both endeared and frustrated by Filch's cat being named Mrs. Norris. It's assumed by the fan base that JKR doesn't really like cats or harbors disdain for people that do love cats, because many of her intentionally problematic characters seemingly have abnormal attachments to cats. Never mind that Ron sleeps with his pet Scabbers every night, but why is Mrs. Norris a Mrs.? Is the implication that she's married to Filch? Anyway, Filch is embarrassed to see that Harry's still there, and he notices that Harry must have seen his quick spell book, and he promptly dismisses Harry, seems to be ashamed, and kind of asks him not to tell anybody. Harry just cannot catch a break in this book. Like, it's like one thing after another. He's really under it. It's very much not the whimsical children's book that the series starts with. So Harry flees Filch's dungeon, and it's revealed that Nearly Headless Nick was the person that caused commotion to get Harry out of trouble for being dirty. And Harry says, hey, well, if there's ever anything I can do in return. And nearly headless Nick invites Harry to his 500th Death Day party, which happens to be on Halloween, coinciding with the big Hogwarts Halloween feast. The amazing and delicious and wonderful, notoriously outstanding Halloween feast. Harry obviously agrees to go, and Ron and Hermione agree to accompany him. Harry, Ron, and Hermione go to the Death Day party, which is filled with other ghosts and dead things alike. All the food is rotted because ghosts obviously can't eat, and when they move through the table, the more rotted it is, the more potent the smell, and thus the more likely they are to taste it. So they can't eat at the feast, they're hungry, it's cold, the music sounds like nails on a chalkboard, but they're being nice. Anyway, we meet Moaning Myrtle at that party, whom up until this point only Hermione has interacted with because Moaning Myrtle is a dead girl that haunts a bathroom. Oh my god, I'll die on this hill. Why? Why is she made to be so unpleasant? A lot of this book particularly portrays women as gullible and kind of annoying, and it's really cemented by Myrtle, who literally has moaning in her name and is, I'll remind you, a dead child. A child that died at school. There's some drama between Nick and the pompous leader of the Headless Hunt, who, crashed the party, taunt him for not actually being headless, and the kids dip. On their way to try to catch the end of the Halloween feast, Harry hears the terrifying voice again. He runs toward it with Ron and Hermione in tow, even though neither of them can hear it. Harry is really distressed. The voice is escalating. So Harry's like, it's about to kill somebody. And so Harry goes to intervene. Harry is not a bystander. They arrive on the scene to find that someone has written on the wall in what looks like blood, but is actually paint, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemy of the Heir, beware." And they see a frozen Mrs. Norris hanging by her tail. No one is super fond of Mrs. Norris because her and Filch seem to have a sort of preternatural connection, and she seems to be able to report the students' misdemeanors to the caretaker. She's a snitch. No one's super sad about this. Anyway, at that moment, the feast has let out, and the corridors on both sides of this message are filling with students. And so the entire school arrives to find Harry, Ron, and Hermione standing before this graphic scene and this ominous message. Malfoy is the first to speak, and he's like, yeah, you mudbloods, you're next. And nobody says anything about that. Everyone's like, okay. All the teachers arrive on the scene. Filch gets there and is so distressed because he's looking at his beloved animal, presumably dead. Lockhart starts in on some soliloquy about how it's a shame that he wasn't there to stop the culprit because he would have known exactly what to do. And the other teachers are just tolerating Lockhart. They know he's a fraud, and his fraudulence calls into question all of their own credibility, right? Being a professor is a pretty prestigious gig, but if anyone can do it, it makes them all look so. Not only is he annoying, rude, doesn't seem to want or be able to read social cues, and spends a lot of time trying to passive-aggressively put them down, he also is making them all look bad. So they kind of just ignore him. Filch wants the students at the scene punished for murdering his cat. He says that it must have been Potter because Potter knows he's a squib, and that this is actually a hate crime. It is actually a hate crime. It's Dumbledore that informs everyone left at the scene that Mrs. Norris is not actually dead, but she has in fact been petrified. He says that obviously second-year students are not responsible for this, which is funny. Snape pipes in and says, perhaps these students were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they're all like, what? The good news is that Professor Sprout is at present harvesting mandrakes, and once they're fully mature, they can be used to depetrify Mrs. Norris, but she'll remain in the hospital wing until the end of the year because that's how long it'll take the mandrakes to mature. She's ultimately in a sort of coma, but more frozen than that. She's like not breathing, is my understanding. Harry tells Ron and Hermione about Filch being a squib, and Ron explains that squibs are sort of the inverse of muggle-born wizards. Squibs are people that are born into magical families that never develop powers, which would be so hard. Ron comes to the conclusion that that's why Filch hates the students. He's bitter, and Ron says that with like some relish. And I personally, obviously, have not been hounded by Filch throughout my education, but finding out that someone hates you because you've been born into a privilege that you've never even considered, the message probably shouldn't be, ha ha, he's bitter. It should maybe be, oh no, he's bitter. You know what I mean? It should probably be revoked judgment and sadness more than a sort of gloating that seems to be happening. The school, particularly Jenny Weasley, is very disturbed by what's happened to Mrs. Norris and all the implications around it. The whole school is in a flurry because everyone wants to know what the Chamber of Secrets is and what exactly they should be beware of. Hermione is particularly perturbed because she's trying to check out Hogwarts: A History at the library. She left her copy at home, but she can't check it out because everyone else is also trying to read up on the Chamber of Secrets. In their History of Magic class, Hermione interrupts their ghost teacher, their only ghost teacher, Professor Binns, who seems simply to not have noticed that he died and just continues to get up for work every day and drone on about wizard history. Anyway, she interrupts Professor Binns to ask about the Chamber of Secrets. Initially, Binns shrugs her off, says it's rumor and his expertise isn't fact. And Hermione says, don't all legends have basis in fact? Which is an interesting thing for her to say, because now we have insistence from our intelligent character that there's a basis for rumor everywhere, and it's like established as canon. Binns relents and tells students about the founding of Hogwarts. The founding of Hogwarts. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was founded over 1,000 years ago by Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. The school was founded in an age when wizards faced much discrimination and even persecution they had to fear for their lives. These four powerful wizards wanted to establish a sort of magical safe haven, a sanctuary for young magical children to come and learn to develop their powers without fear of Muggle persecution or prying eyes. Things were going swimmingly. The founders were going from town to town, seeking out children with special talents, before a rift began to grow between Salazar and the other founders. Slytherin believed that the school should be more selective about the magical talent that they brought within its walls. Slytherin believed that they should only teach children with magical parents. The creed morphed from one of fear and mistrust into one of superiority. But this tale implies that Slytherin was the most fearful of all the founders, believing that inviting Muggle-born children into the school could potentially reveal the secret that they'd built the school to conceal. Slytherin's argument is inviting Muggle-born children into these walls makes all of the children, and thus the entirety of the magical world, vulnerable to being found out. And so Slytherin is rumored to have built a secret lair somewhere within the foundation of the school that only his heir and his heir alone will be able to open. A sanctuary inside the sanctuary. And inside that sanctuary is said to house a monster of such terror that upon its release it will purge the school of the Muggle-born filth that Slytherins so feared. The kids are like, what? Anyway, Professor Binns is like, it's all hogwash anyway, because no one has found it in 1,000 years. The chamber obviously doesn't exist. The school has been searched top to bottom, yada, yada, yada. And all the kids are like, well, but if only Slytherin's heir can open it, wouldn't it make sense that no one else had found it? And Professor Binns is like, nah. Harry and Ron are walking away from class, and Ron says, I knew Slytherin was responsible for graduating many dark wizards, but I didn't even know about all of that pureblood foundational stuff. I would never be in Slytherin. You couldn't even pay me to be in Slytherin. He's like, what the heck is wrong with the Slytherins? And Harry has a bit of a panic. Most of this book is Harry having a bit of a panic, and I empathize. As a person with anxiety, I empathize. Because you'll remember that the Sorting Hat told Harry that he would do great things in Slytherin, and Harry asked for Gryffindor, and he worries that him asking for Gryffindor invalidates the credibility of the Hat's choice. As Harry is walking through the castle, Justin Fitch-Fletchley ends up running from Harry, and Harry's like, that was weird. And eventually, Harry guesses that everyone is saying that he's Slytherin's heir, because he was at the scene of the crime, and he's Harry Potter. Our three protagonists go investigating the crime scene, and they notice water all over the floor, and they believe it's coming from Myrtle's bathroom. Hermione attempts to lead them inside, but Ron refuses. Can't go in there. That's a girl's toilet. So Hermione's like, no one uses it because it's not easy to pee, while Myrtle's like crying about the fact that she's dead. So Hermione's like, it's fine, just come in. No one's gonna be in here. But Ron feels weird about it all the while, and that's emphasized. Harry walks in and says it's the gloomiest, most depressing bathroom he's ever been in his entire life. And he grew up with the Dursleys, so they talk to Myrtle and they leave. And as they're leaving, Percy sees Ron exiting the girls' bathroom and takes 5 points from Gryffindor for like the impropriety, I guess, but he doesn't ask what they were doing in there. And he doesn't dock Harry points. I don't know. Ron is convinced that Malfoy is the heir. He's like, that's so obvious, like what with everything he says and does. And Hermione is like, Malfoy? Like, do we really think Draco Malfoy is the heir of Slytherin? The heir is meant to have some degree of power. She's like, come on, Malfoy? Really? So this brings us to the Polyjuice potion and the plan to break into the Slytherin common room. Hermione says, well, we obviously have to find out if it's Malfoy just to rule him out. So what we'll do is we'll get Malfoy to confess. And the only way he'd confess to us is if he thought we were his friends. So we're going to have to turn ourselves into Slytherins. And that's that. And Harry and Ron are like, but how? And she's like, didn't you hear Snape mention Polyjuice potions in class the other day? And Ron is like, you think I have nothing better to do in potions than listen to Snape? That's funny. But it's in the restricted section of the library, so they'll need permission from a teacher in order to be able to check out that book. And Ron says, hard to imagine why we want the book, really, if we weren't going to make one of the potions. And he's got me cracking up, like, this is really funny. Hermione says, okay, well, maybe I'll say I need it for some sort of theory. And there's only one teacher dumb enough to believe that. So in their next Defense Against the Dark Arts class, which consists of Lockhart forcing Harry to reenact Lockhart's greatest hits, this sounds so humiliating, I can't even imagine. The 3 kids stay after class. Hermione starts her pitch to Lockhart, handing over the slip for the book, and Lockhart signs it without even looking at it. Ron says, Lockhart will sign anything if it stands still long enough. They try not to look like they're hurrying to the library and they check out the book. Even after all of this, Hermione asks the librarian if she can keep the slip of paper that Lockhart has signed. And if any of the boys were fangirling in this way too, because like I do think we have a tendency, right, via parasocial relationship to forgive our celebrities, don't meet your heroes, X, Y, or Z. But if we just saw one boy feel this way about Lockhart, all of the criticism would go away. It's just because it's only women. If something is marketed toward young girls, it is typically immediately dismissed as frivolous or invalid or not credible or not smart. And what JK Rowling, what the writing is doing here is validating that idea that if a bunch of girls are swarming around something, it's probably not worth the attention. The kids, Hermione, decides to brew this potion in a stall in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom because no one ever goes in there. It should be known that the potions in this book are so intense and disgusting that like Harry has to avert his eyes. Like this is a dark magic potion book that 12-year-old Hermione is like, she's like, let me get my hands dirty for justice. Hermione estimates that it'll take her about a month to obtain and brew the ingredients. Plan to enact this over the holidays. Gryffindor's first Quidditch match of the season is against Slytherin. Harry's never wanted to beat anyone so bad. The team is feeling pretty nervous because of Slytherin's new equipment. They have these wicked fast brooms, but Oliver Wood says that we've got better flyers on those brooms, so we're going to take them down. And that's what counts. They go out and the game starts, and it becomes immediately clear that one of the bludger balls has been bewitched or enchanted to target Harry. The ball keeps launching itself at him, and Fred and George have to devote all of their game time to keeping the ball from knocking Harry off his broom or breaking his face. While they're doing that, one of the other bludgers hits Katie, I think, and Wood calls for a timeout. The team all comes together and he's like, what the heck, you guys, where are you? And the twins explain the situation. But because the ball has been under lock and key since last night, questioning the ball or suggesting that it's enchanted will result in a forfeit for Gryffindor. And that doesn't feel like an option because then it means they won't be eligible for the Quidditch Cup. Harry says, forget about it, let me play, don't defend me, I'll figure it out. The twins scold Oliver because they were like, this is like, he is 12, like, and he might die out there, and you told him to win or die trying. But Harry's like, I got it. You guys just leave me at it, I could do it. Anyway, so Harry takes the bludger on by himself, zooming around the field. He can't stop for even 1 second, dodging this ball until he notices the snitch. And the snitch happens to be next to the ear of Draco Malfoy, who is at that moment taunting him. Harry forgets himself for a minute, and the bludger immediately smashes into his elbow and breaks his arm. But nonetheless, Harry does manage to capture the snitch one-armed while flying a broom, still still attempting to evade the bewitched bludger. Harry is just so talented. And even after the game is finished, Harry is lying on the pitch with a broken arm, and the twins have to like handle the bludger and like get it to not attack him. Lockhart approaches Harry, and this is legit so scary. Like, actually reading this book, genuinely terrifying. Lockhart approaches him and insists on fixing Harry's arm, and Harry has never seen Lockhart perform a spell that he didn't mess up. Harry is like, please no. Colin Creevey is taking pictures, and Lockhart casts a spell without Harry's consent that dissolves all the bones in Harry's arm. And he's like, well, hey, at least they're not broken anymore, and he like saunters off. Harry is taken to Madame Pomfrey from there, and she's pissed because she can mend a broken bone in an instant, but regrowing bones is nasty business that'll take all night. Oh my god. And he always has such a good attitude about it. Like, I'd be like, hey, I can't promise I wouldn't be a little sullen. His teacher did this to him. So it's not all bad though, because the entire Gryffindor team hangs with Harry around his hospital bed, and they all eat and snack and laugh about their triumphant win over the Slytherins. And they also hear that Malfoy got chewed out by the Slytherin captain for having the snitch literally next to his ear and not managing to catch it. After everyone leaves, Harry falls asleep, and then he wakes up to Dobby sitting on his hospital bed. It's revealed that Dobby is the one who stopped Harry and Ron from going through platform 9 3/4 to try to keep them from going to school, and Dobby is the one that enchanted the bludger to target Harry. Dobby hoped that Harry would get so injured that he'd have to go home? What? And Harry's like, Dobby, please stop trying to save me. This exchange with Dobby gets us some information. Dobby reveals that the Chamber of Secrets has been opened before, and it is, in fact, the event that he was trying to keep Harry from encountering. Dobby says things like he's used to death threats and house elves are the dregs of the wizarding world. He tells Harry that he can only ever be free if he's presented with clothing. He currently wears a pillowcase. And because Harry is in the hospital wing and awake, he's witness to Dumbledore and Madame Pomfrey bringing in the next victim of the Chamber of Secrets. And that person happens to be Colin Creevey. Colin Creevey has also been petrified. And when they check his camera, his film has been turned to ash, so we don't have a picture of the culprit. Dumbledore confirms that this does indeed mean that the Chamber of Secrets has been opened again. The next morning, Harry goes in search of his friends, and he's moderately hurt that they aren't anxious to see whether or not his bones grew back. He finds his friends in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, and Colin Creevey's petrification has led them to really want to speed along their timeline with the potion brew. They're trying to hustle it up. The next ingredient they need, they're going to have to rob Snape's office for. And Harry says he'd rather face whatever's in the Chamber of Secrets alone than have to rob Snape's office. But spoiler alert, he does both. Hermione says she's the one that should do the actual robbing because she's not on thin ice and she doesn't think she'll be expelled if she gets caught. So in potions the next day, Harry has to set off a firework and he launches it into Crabbe's cauldron, and it explodes a potion all over the room and everybody freaks out. It actually causes anyone that gets hit by the potion, like their face starts to swell up. Sounds really freaky, sounds really gross. Anyway, Snape says if he ever finds out who threw that firework, they will be expelled. So the threat of expulsion is really everywhere in this book, but don't worry, Harry's not going to get expelled. Hermione is able to add the ingredient, and she says the potion will be ready in 2 weeks. This brings us to the dueling club. Lockhart gets the idea that the kids should have an after-school dueling club where they learn how to inflict enchantments on one another, and Snape is supposed to assist him. Without really teaching the kids anything, Lockhart challenges Snape, and Snape is able to disarm him and sort of like blow him off his feet. He's kind of embarrassed by this, and so Lockhart immediately releases the kids to hex one another, and they all just like pummel the shit out of each other. Then Snape gets the class in order again, and he calls Draco and Harry up to perform a duel as a sort of example for the rest of the students in the club. Lockhart is supposed to teach Harry how to defend himself, but he doesn't, and Snape teaches Draco how to shoot a snake out of his wand. Draco shoots a large snake at Harry, and that snake turns itself on none other than Justin Fitch-Fletchley. And Harry, who's spoken to snakes before, tells the snake to stop. But everyone in school becomes pretty freaked out for 2 reasons. 1, most wizards can't speak to snakes. In fact, being able to speak to snakes and understand snakes makes one a Parselmouth, and it's a pretty unique and uncommon skill. In fact, it's the skill that Salazar Slytherin was most famous for. 2, when Harry's speaking Parselmouth, no one else can understand him. Harry thinks he's speaking English, but to everyone else, it sounds like a series of hisses. this. Anyway, so no one knows that what Harry was doing was calling the snake off of Justin. It looked like Harry was egging it on toward Justin. So this confirms for the whole school that Harry is in fact Slytherin's heir, and everyone knows Justin is Muggle-born, and he even told Harry himself on the first day of school. That's why Harry set the snake on him. And Harry's like, oh no, but I'm a Gryffindor. And Harry has a hard time sleeping that night because he's like, okay, I just gotta set things straight with Justin. It's just a misunderstanding. I'll just explain the confusion. And the next day he goes looking for Justin, but he hears a table of Hufflepuffs led by Ernie Macmillan saying Justin is currently hiding right now from Harry Potter. They're gossiping about why it's so obvious that Harry is clearly Slytherin's heir. They're saying that the only reason Harry defeated Voldemort as a baby was so that he could take his place as a more powerful dark wizard. Harry keeps looking for Justin and finds him petrified. Not a good look. And he finds nearly headless Nick seeming to be the dead version of his ghost self, but obviously ghosts can't die twice. McGonagall takes Harry to Dumbledore, and Harry is so panicked. He's like, I swear I'm not attacking people. She takes him to Dumbledore's office. The password is lemon drop. While Harry's waiting alone in Dumbledore's office, he redons the sorting hat to ask it if he really is a Gryffindor or if he should have been put in Slytherin. And the sorting hat starts talking and says, no, you would have been great in Slytherin. And Harry yanks the hat off his head. It's like, whatever then. Then he meets Dumbledore's bird, his phoenix, Fawkes. And Fawkes seems really ill, really fatigued, kind of on death's door. And right as he's thinking that the last thing he needs is for Dumbledore's bird to die when he's in the office alone with it, the bird bursts into flame. And Dumbledore comes in and Harry's like, oh my God, Professor, I'm so sorry. I couldn't do it. There was nothing I could do. I'm so sorry. I didn't set your bird on fire. At that moment, Hagrid bursts into the room and he's like, Dumbledore, Harry's not the culprit. I promise. Harry could never. And Dumbledore is like, I know. I don't think Harry is the culprit. And Hagrid's like, all right. Cool, I'll just wait outside then. And the reason Hagrid is in the castle is because someone has been killing all of his roosters. And that's supposed to be a clue. And this is what I mean about the book being really contained, is that none of this is solvable, right? Like when we're reading it, it feels like we're supposed to be collecting clues about spiders and roosters and the spelling of people's names, but that's not. It's an impossible riddle to solve that feels very satisfying at the end of it, but it's not a real mystery book. So a lot of the school is terrified of Harry, and a lot of people won't talk to him, but Fred and George make jokes about it. They go around saying like, watch out, heir of Slytherin coming through or whatever, and it makes Ginny really upset, but Harry's like, at least they find the idea of me being a predator ludicrous, so he kind of likes it. Hermione wakes both boys up on Christmas morning and is like, wake up, potion's ready, let's do it. And they're like, good morning, Hermione, happy Christmas. And she's like, okay, here's your job. Job 1, get the DNA of your subject. Already. What 2? Drug your target. Hermione. She's like, look, I drugged both of these cupcakes, and we know that Crabbe and Goyle are so greedy that they're just bound to eat anything in sight. So, the cupcakes are drugged, Crabbe and Goyle will pass out, you can take their DNA, and we'll put it in the potion, and then we'll sneak into the Slytherin common room. And the boys are like, this seems like there's a lot of ways that this could go wrong. Have you ever drugged anyone before? But anyway, they do it anyway, and it works out. Crabbe and Goyle eat the cupcakes. They get Crabbe and Goyle's DNA, and they put it into the brew, and then they turn into Crabbe and Goyle. But Hermione is unable to go on the mission that she planned and orchestrated, facilitated, because she accidentally didn't get the right hair from her target. She accidentally got a cat hair, and so the potion has turned her into a cat, and they have to take her to Madame Pomfrey, and she's in the hospital wing basically for the rest of this book. But Harry and Ron go into the Slytherin common room. The password is pureblood, and it's for some reason plausible for them to ask Malfoy what the password is, and Malfoy's like, he's like, wait, oh yeah, pureblood. It's like, JK, come on, that's a bad password. So in the Slytherin common room, Malfoy reveals that he is not Slytherin's heir, and he doesn't know who is, but he sure as shit it's not Harry Potter. He says the last time the chamber was open was 50 years ago, and a student died. Also, he tells them that Mr. Weasley is facing an inquiry at work, and he shows them the Daily Prophet article that says so, and he tells them that Malfoy Manor had been raided under the Muggle Protection Act. So we stand Mr. Weasley for still doing his job in the face of public scrutiny. Also, Malfoy says he hopes that Hermione Granger is killed. Like, Malfoy, the child, is handing out death threats left and right. It just gives us a lot of insight into the way that people talk in his home. He thinks this is normal. Now, we must talk about the diary. One day, Ron and Harry see flooding outside of Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. They investigate and find an empty diary with the initials T.M. Riddle and a date on it. It's dated about 50 years ago. Harry deduces that the owner of the diary must have been Muggle-born because of the street the diary was purchased on. Like, okay, Harry, powers of deduction, I see you. Ron recognizes the name on the diary because he spent hours polishing a trophy with the same name on it, but he can't remember what the trophy had been for. They do some investigating and they find out that Tom Riddle had been afforded a Medal of Valor for something that is undisclosed, that he was head boy, and he was afforded a Medal of Merit for his schoolwork. Hermione guesses that the Medal of Valor may have been for catching the heir of Slytherin, and Ron's like, okay, and what evidence do you have for that? Meanwhile, things going on at Hogwarts. The mandrakes are growing into adolescence, so the antidote is just that much closer to being brewed. I will remind you that these mandrakes must be murdered for the brew to relieve the petrified. The kids end up signing up for classes next year. Third years get to pick more classes. They don't get to drop any of their core classes, but they get to add classes. Hermione signs up for everything. Lockhart makes a really big deal about Valentine's Day, and the whole school is sort of nuisanced by his desire to celebrate love and admiration. It is implied, basically confirmed, that Hermione sent Lockhart a Valentine, which, you know, why is this 12-year-old student able to send this adult man her teacher? She's sending her teacher a Valentine, and we were meant to think she should be embarrassed. Oh, okay. Just checking. One of many students has sent him a Valentine's, by the way. And Lockhart has also set up these like singing dwarf grams, and someone sends Harry a singing dwarf gram, and it really embarrasses Harry, and he tries to like run away from it, but the dwarf like grabs his legs and is like holding onto his bag, and like consent is really not something that is practiced at all in this book, and it's actually freaky. That leads to Harry's bag ripping open and a whole crew of students seeing the contents of Harry's bag, and it's noted that Ginny Weasley seems to be looking in horror at the diary now in Harry's possession. This altercation leads Harry to understand that the diary actually absorbs ink. Harry starts writing in the diary, and the diary starts writing back. The diary introduces itself to Harry as Tom Riddle, and he asks Harry if he can show him about the last time the Chamber of Secrets was opened. The diary pulls Harry into a sort of memory, and the memory starts with Tom Riddle asking his headmaster, not Professor Dumbledore, but his predecessor, if he can stay at Hogwarts over the summer instead of having to return to the orphanage. So the wizarding world is comfortable with their students returning to an orphanage over the summer. There's something in there that's just like not quite right. You know what I mean? Anyway, the headmaster says, "No, I'm sorry, Tom. Because of your qualifications, normally that might be something we could make a case for, but we're thinking about closing the school in its entirety because of the death of the Muggle-born student and the danger that is lurking around the school that we can't seem to find an answer to." So, through Tom's memory, Harry understands that now Tom feels responsible for catching the heir of Slytherin so that he can stay at school, his home. The diary shows Harry, a 13-year-old Hagrid, opening a chest and a large spider coming out of that chest. We learn that this is actually why Hagrid was expelled. He was expelled for being the heir of Slytherin and releasing this monster onto his fellow students. And the spider is blamed for the death of the girl. This makes Hagrid 63 years old, which is interesting. Harry's concerned by this, but he's certain of Hagrid's character and knows that he never intended for anyone to get hurt. Like, he definitely wasn't unleashing a monster upon the school to purge it of Muggle filth. Later, as Harry's trying to process all of this, he comes back to his dorm room to find it ransacked. Somebody has robbed him and they have stolen the diary. This is very confusing for Harry and Ron because only a fellow Gryffindor could have done this, because only Gryffindors can get into the Gryffindor common room. I mean, if they know the password, right? But like, the Slytherin password is pure blood. Like, okay. Up until this point, they sort of assumed Slytherin's heir to be Slytherin, but now there's some speculation. At breakfast the next day, Hermione is urging Harry to report the robbery, but he doesn't really want to because he doesn't want to reopen the suspicion against Hagrid. He already feels protective of the adult around him. Then Hermione has an insight and she's like, hold on, I figured it out. I have to go to the library. And she runs off to the library. Meanwhile, the other kids are headed out to the Quidditch pitch. Before the Gryffindor team can even start, the match gets canceled. Wood is distraught about this. He's a wreck. He's like, oh my God, this means no House Cup again. The reason the match has been canceled is because there's been a double attack. 2 students have been petrified. Penelope Clearwater, a Ravenclaw prefect, and Hermione have both been petrified in the library. Everyone immediately stops suspecting Harry because they're like, obviously he would never hurt Hermione Granger. And McGonagall tells everyone that the school is bound to close soon because they can't continue to endanger students like this. Harry immediately empathizes with Tom Riddle's situation. Harry and Ron decide to use Harry's dad's invisibility cloak to sneak down to Hagrid's hut in the dead of night because they want to ask him what happened 50 years ago. They get there and pretty immediately have to hide again because Dumbledore and the Minister of Magic are also at Hagrid's door. So from under the invisibility cloak, they witness the Minister of Magic sort of apologetically tell Hagrid that he will now be imprisoned in Azkaban until they can resolve this whole situation. Dumbledore assures the Minister of Hagrid's innocence, but the Minister doesn't really think Hagrid's guilty. He just needs to create the appearance of doing something to quell the nervous population. The Minister insists to Hagrid that this is not punishment, it's just a precaution, but we know what's happening in Azkaban, so he's gonna be punished regardless. As that's all happening, Lucius Malfoy bursts into Hagrid's hut and informs Dumbledore, breathlessly, that he has been voted out of his headmaster's seat by all the governors on the school board, and he's supposed to immediately exit the premises. Hagrid and Dumbledore are being led away by the authorities that be, and Hagrid says, if anybody wants to know any information about me, all they'd have to do is follow the spiders. And Dumbledore says, you might find that it's harder to remove me from this castle than you think. Help will always be available at Hogwarts to anyone who asks for it. So let's talk about the spiders in the Forbidden Forest. We learn very early on in this book that Ron does not like spiders. In fact, they're like his main phobia. They're like the main thing he's afraid of. And the reason he's afraid of spiders, this is diabolical. The reason he's afraid of spiders is because as a child, Fred and George turned his teddy bear while he was hugging it into an enormous hairy spider. I want you to imagine right now, you are hugging your pillow, your comfort object, you're in your bed, you feel your most safe, and the item that makes you feel most safe is turned into this big giant spider. I'm a friend to the spiders. Doesn't mean I want to cuddle them, right? You wouldn't have to be terrified of spiders for this to be literally scarring. Like, this is horribly traumatic. Anyway, Harry and Ron decide that they will follow the spiders if they can find a trail, which they had been seeing a lot of early on in the school year, but now they can't find almost any spiders. When they finally do spot a trail, they take Fang, Hagrid's dog, with them, and they follow the spiders into the Forbidden Forest. And Ron takes a deep breath, he fortifies himself, and he follows the thing he's most afraid of into the place he's most afraid of with his best friend and a dog as a 12-year-old. And I'm just like, that is strength of character that I don't know that I have. So they find the trail and they walk deep into the Forbidden Forest. At some point in time, they hear a loud rumbling that they think is some sort of animal that's going to hurt them, but it turns out to be the car. The car has found them. And right as they're rejoicing about the car, the two boys are picked up by enormous spiders and carried further into like the web den, which is so scary. Anyway, they're dropped into the web den. They meet Aragog, the sort of spider king. Aragog is the spider accused of being the monster that came from the Chamber of Secrets, but Aragog tells us that he was actually born in a distant land, hatched and cared for by Hagrid. Not such a good look. But Aragog says actually the monster in the Chamber of Secrets is the spider's mortal enemy, and that they never harmed any humans out of respect for Hagrid. He was raised by Hagrid. Hagrid is his mom. But Aragog says he's never had prey wander so willingly into his den, and how can he deny his children this fresh meat? So the spiders sort of move to eat the young boys. Can you just imagine this from the perspective of Ron for a second? This is his worst fear come to life, and he is just tolerating it. He's just doing it. Strength. But Mr. Weasley's car bursts in and saves them. Harry tells Ron to throw Fang in the car. Ron does, and they get in the car, and the car drives them out of the Forbidden Forest, and they're saved from Aragog and the spiders. And Ron is like, I'll never forgive Hagrid. Follow the spiders. What the Ron's like, we didn't even learn anything. And Harry is like, well, that's not true. We know that Hagrid did not open the Chamber of Secrets, and we know that a girl died in a bathroom. And I wonder if she's still there. At breakfast the next morning, Jenny seems really nervous and maybe wants to confide something in Ron. Harry actually says that she is like rocking back and forth, and she reminds him of Dobby right before he's about to confess something that he shouldn't. Or he can't. But Percy interrupts her and she scurries off. Ron says, Percy, what the heck? Jenny was about to tell me something. And he says, oh, that You don't have to worry about that. She happened to catch me doing something that's really not anyone's business and you don't have to worry about it. I thought she would keep her word, but whatever. It's not a big deal. It's not serious. And Ron's like, Percy, what were you doing? Ron and Harry are trying to sneak into Moaning Myrtle's bathroom to ask her how she died. They think that she is the victim of the heir of Slytherin, but it's very challenging to sneak away from their teachers because they're all being chaperoned from place to place because people are getting knocked out in this castle left and right. Harry and Ron eventually convince Lockhart to let them walk alone through a corridor because Lockhart is just running his mouth about how obviously all the danger's gone and the Ministry wouldn't have taken Hagrid away unless they knew for sure that he did it, blah, 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 like just yada yada. And they finally get free from their chaperone and they run into McGonagall. And McGonagall is like, what are you guys doing out by yourselves? And they say that they want to go visit Hermione and they want to tell her that the mandrakes are almost ready and that soon she won't be petrified anymore. And it makes McGonagall cry. And so she lets them go up to the hospital wing. And up until this point, they weren't allowed to see her. So McGonagall buys it. They go to the hospital wing. And there, in Hermione's hand, they notice a piece of paper. That piece of paper has been ripped out from a library book, and it happens to be the definition of what a basilisk is. A basilisk is a sort of enormous snake, an enemy to all spiders, that has a fatal stare. If you look in its eyes, you'll die. And apparently, the crow of the rooster is the only thing that's fatal to the basilisk. So, you're supposed to be able to put all these clues together, but, Harry and Ron work out that Mrs. Norris must have seen the basilisk through the puddle that had come from Moaning Myrtle's flooded bathroom. And that's why she was petrified instead of killed. Colin had seen the basilisk through his camera. That's why he was petrified instead of killed. Justin had seen the basilisk through nearly headless Nick. And Hermione and Penelope Clearwater had seen the basilisk through Hermione's mirror. By that point in time, she had figured it out. Also, under the definition, Hermione has written the word pipes, thus explaining to us why Harry can hear this voice moving through the castle when nobody else can. Harry speaks Parseltongue. He can understand the snake. The snake is moving through the pipes, and that must mean that the Chamber of Secrets opens at Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Around this same time, Harry and Ron overhear a staff meeting between teachers where McGonagall says she's going to have to close the school because a student has finally been taken into the Chamber of Secrets with an ominous message left in her wake. The student that has been taken is Jenny Weasley. Lockhart has been running his mouth. He's running his mouth again. McGonagall and all the other teachers task Lockhart with going to save Jenny, even though they know he's incompetent and won't be able to do it because they just want to get him out of the way. They're like, didn't you say you knew where the chamber was? And didn't you say you knew just how to fight the monster? And that only if the Ministry hadn't taken Hagrid away, why don't you just go and do what you said you were going to do? You're the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Why don't you just be useful? So Harry and Ron go to find Lockhart to tell them the information that they have about the basilisk and the chamber. But when they get there, Lockhart is packing his bags and is clearly about to flee the castle. And they're like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm leaving. I don't know how to fight. I'm not confronting some sort of monster in the Chamber of Secrets. And Ron is like, what about all the books you wrote? What about all the cool stuff you did? And he says books can be misleading. And Ron's like, you wrote the books. And Lockhart discloses that he didn't actually do any of the heroic stuff depicted in his books. In fact, he stole the heroic tales of other witches and wizards who he didn't think were worthy of celebrity. He says a lot of hateful stuff. Then he'd wipe these witches and wizards' memories so that they wouldn't know that he stole their tales. He's entirely a fraud. He's never done anything real. The only thing he actually knows how to do is a memory charm. And so he moves to wipe the memories of the boys in front of him. But before he can do that, Harry disarms him. And he says, you shouldn't have let Snape teach us that. It's kind of an alpha line. Now at this point, perhaps they should get a teacher, but they don't. They walk Lockhart to Moaning Myrtle's bathrooms in the Chamber of Secrets, and they confirm with Myrtle that she doesn't exactly know how she died. She just saw this pair of eyes, and all of a sudden she was dead. So she was in fact killed by the basilisk. And Harry discovers that if he speaks Parseltongue, the sink opens up and the Chamber of Secrets is revealed. The boys force Lockhart to slide down the tunnel first. It's long and dark and scary, and Ron estimates that the tunnel takes them all the way under the lake of the school. They're deep, deep, deep underground. It's slimy, it's dank, it's dark. It sounds pretty terrifying down there, and they come across an enormous snakeskin. Lockhart does a sort of distraction maneuver, and he steals Ron's wand, and then he goes to cast a memory charm, but the thing that we know about Ron's wand, that Lockhart doesn't know is that it doesn't work and it tends to backfire, so he ends up casting a memory charm, one upon himself, but also causing an explosion that sends both the boys flying in different directions, and a wall of rock collapses in between them. So Ron and Lockhart are trapped by the tunnels, and Harry is the only person that can move forward. Ron says he's going to spend his time digging out a hole so that Harry can get back through once he's found Jenny. Lockhart doesn't remember anything about where he is or who he is or what he is or whatever. So Harry, at 12 years old, will venture alone into the monster's lair. He arrives at a wall, has to speak Parseltongue again, and it opens and he enters the lair. He sees Jenny at the back of the lair and he runs toward her. And there he is greeted by Tom Riddle. And it takes Harry a long time to figure out whether Tom Riddle is friend or foe. He's like, help me, Tom, help me get Jenny out. Why aren't you helping me? What's going on? Give me my wand. Help me. And Tom's just like pocketing Harry's wand and being like, He's just observing him. Tom Riddle explains that he's not really here right now. He's just a memory preserved in a diary by his 16-year-old self. Tom Riddle explains that he's been told a lot about Harry Potter from Ginny Weasley, who apparently had the diary at the beginning of the year. Ginny Weasley had been confiding in the diary, sharing her troubles and woes, and the diary in turn befriended her. The diary was able to pour some of its essence into her. She began losing chunks of time. She woke up covered in feathers. One time she woke up covered in paint. Terrifying. And it turns out it was Jenny who technically opened the Chamber of Secrets, but it was really Tom Riddle possessing her. He opened the chamber, just like last time. Then Tom Riddle spells out his name. There's this big anagram reveal that again feels like an aha moment, but it's definitely not. Like, we didn't know his middle name was Marvolo, and the I am of it all. Okay, whatever. So yeah, Tom Riddle is actually a young Lord Voldemort before he becomes like deformed and decrepit by his withering soul. And he's obviously interested in Harry. Ginny Weasley has told Tom Riddle's diary that Harry will eventually defeat him, without knowing obviously who she was talking to. So yeah, he's interested in Harry because this child defeated him in his most powerful form, and he asks Harry some questions about it, and Harry reveals that it was love that protected him. And Tom's like, oh, cool, so there's nothing special about you at all. It was just luck that led to you defeating the greatest wizard of all time. Stalling for time, Harry says, you're not the greatest sorcerer in the world. You're not the greatest at anything. Dumbledore is. And even when you're powerful and not just 16, you'll be more afraid of him than anybody else. And at that moment, Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, swoops into the chamber and drops the sorting hat at Harry's feet. And he's like, damn, not exactly the resources that I had hoped for, but we'll work with what we got. Tom Riddle sicks the basilisk on Harry, and he initially tries to fight it by keeping his eyes closed, because if he looks it in the eye, he'll just immediately die. But Fawkes swoops down and takes out the eyes of the basilisk so Harry can open his eyes. I think one of the eyes falls on Harry's head. Harry is saying, help me. And then Fawkes again drops the sorting hat at Harry's feet. He puts it on his head, and a sword plunks on top of his head, nearly like knocking him out in this moment. What has plunked on his head? But the sword of Godric Gryffindor. And Harry uses that sword to pretty immediately end the life of the basilisk that has lived underneath the school for like 1,000 years. Anyway, but not before one of the basilisk's teeth pierces Harry, and basilisk venom is also fatal. As Harry lays in this dank, dark chamber, dying to the taunts of Tom Riddle, Fawkes swoops over him and cries into his wound. And something that Riddle doesn't seem to realize, the tears of the phoenix actually have healing properties. So Harry wakes back up and he is fully healed and revived. Before he even knows what he's doing, he takes the tooth that had impaled him and stabs it into the diary. And the essence of Tom Riddle starts to leak out. This memory of Tom Riddle is no more. Ultimately, Harry has confronted the Dark Lord once again in a different form and come out triumphant. Fawkes carries Harry, Jenny, Ron, and Lockhart out of the Chamber of Secrets up the same tube that they came down, and they are returned to their peers, family, and teachers. Harry's really nervous that Jenny's going to get in trouble, so he tries to explain what had happened without disclosing the diary at all. Dumbledore comes to his aid and tells the very worried Weasley family that Jenny had in fact been possessed by Voldemort. Both Ron and Harry score 200 points for Gryffindor, Gryffindor, and Gryffindor wins the House Cup for the second year in a row. Hooray. And soon after everyone leaves, Lucius Malfoy bursts in again to admonish Dumbledore for being on the premises. And Dumbledore reveals that all the governors of the school had called him to confess that they had been threatened and blackmailed into voting the way that they did, and now that they knew a student had been taken into the chamber, they wanted Dumbledore back at school. So it's revealed that not only obviously is Lucius Malfoy corrupt himself, but he resorts to corruption in order to get things done. Dobby is with Lucius Malfoy because he belongs to him, and he seems to be indicating to Harry that there's a connection between Malfoy and the diary that Harry has killed. It occurs to Harry that Lucius Malfoy must have slipped this diary to Ginny during the brawl at the bookstore. Lucius leaves in a huff, like, prove it, and Harry asks if he can return the diary to Lucius Malfoy, and Dumbledore is like, sure, Harry, but like hurry, because like the feast is like going on. And Harry, as he's running toward Lucius Malfoy, manages to also take off one of his dirty, slimy, disgusting socks and give it to Malfoy with the diary. As Harry anticipated, Malfoy flings the sock off the diary, and who catches it but Dobby? And thus, Dobby has officially been freed from his master. Dobby is officially a free elf. Dumbledore tells Harry that he must have shown him real loyalty down there, otherwise there's no other reason why Fawkes would have presented himself to him. And it is revealed that Harry can speak Parseltongue because when Dumbledore attempted to kill him, he placed a piece of himself inside Harry, and that's why Harry has these aspects of Slytherin inside of him. And Harry starts to panic. How am I different than Voldemort then if I have this essence of him? And Dumbledore says, you're different because you chose Gryffindor. It's our choices that make us who we are. And then he says that the sword only would have presented itself to a true Gryffindor because it is indeed the sword of the founder of Gryffindor House, Godric Gryffindor. The kids ride back on the train, and Jenny reveals that Percy has had a girlfriend all year. It's Penelope Clearwater, the girl that had been petrified. And Harry is forced to return to the Dursleys for another summer of abuse and neglect after yet another terrifying and traumatic encounter with the Dark Lord. I do think the point is that the same people that were ruining things last time are back again and ruining them still. And it may seem implausible that the villain of the situation has been the same the whole time, and yet here we are. Can't argue with the truth. This book sort of is contained in itself. It's a full story, and it's quite enjoyable to read. I think it reveals pieces of JKR in ways that she maybe did not intend. Things take a pretty intense turn in the next book. My name is Sage. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time.